This is the Hidden Killers podcast with Tony Brueski.
Talking about the Long Island serial killer, the Gilgo Beach murderer. The man in custody and charged of those crimes is Rex Heuermann, the man who was responsible for police work in that area for the many years that it appears Heuermann was allegedly active. His name is James Burke. He's also a human being who liked to frequent sex workers. In fact, he was just arrested for it the other day. Yeah, he's already been arrested and charged with other crimes, but he's a corrupt police chief, so of course he's also engaging in this. The question I think that a lot of us have right now is, why did he not go after the individual that was clearly outlined to him as being the possible Gilgo Beach murderer from people who have eyewitness accounts of seeing Rex more than 10 years ago? To help us answer that question, defense attorney Bob Motta and host of the podcast Defense Diaries is joining us. Bob, what is the reasoning here? Was it, I like to frequent them and I don't want them arrested? Or is it, if I start, arresting some people here, or I start enforcing some of these laws, people are going to start talking about me? And it's more so kind of a, you don't talk, I don't talk, and we go kind of let each one live and let live. But at the same point, you're creating an environment where this sort of stuff, you have the crime that comes with it, the murders that come with it. And if not investigated, no one's going to dig in any which way or shape or form.
Yeah, it's like, this would obviously be complete speculation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it could be any of the things that you said. It could be that he was frequenting either establishments or, he was paying for sex with sex workers at that time, and he was seriously concerned that an in-depth investigation might reveal things about him that he didn't want out there. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's true, or it could be indifference. It could, either way, it's bad.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, no matter what the situation is, there's no reasonable explanation for it at all. Whether it's because of his own, malfeasance in terms of, like, he was spending money on sex workers himself and he didn't want to get outed because all of his detectives are going to be digging into it. Or, is it a thing where they just didn't care?
Yeah.
Either way, it's gross.
Even if it is looked at as, ignorance or looking the other way because of what they did, maybe not even necessarily like in a cover-up sort of way, just we're not going to spend our resources just over there.
Indifference.
There's an element that reminds me to a certain extent, a totally different type situation, but involving an officer who willfully knew something bad was going on and didn't do anything. We're talking Scott Peterson, the school shooting, where he stood outside. He was found innocent, but obviously we can look at the facts of the case, and he was there. He could have at least attempted to save lives. That's almost the same sort of thing in a different sort of context here with the police chief, James Burke, of, had you acted, you could have saved lives.
Right. I mean, it's a little bit of a stretch. That Scott Peterson thing, look, the guy was 65. They were like, I see the arguments for both sides.
Sure.
Was it cowardly that he didn't go in? Certainly. Look, if you're gonna take that office, if you're going to be, sworn in as a police officer, it's one of your duties. I don't necessarily know that means that, if you're walking, that you're obligated to walk into certain death, which I think probably would have been the case. The man had no vest in, he had no intel. If I'm thinking about it from a human perspective, that case, he's 65, he's got grandkids, he's probably a minute away from retiring. He cowered. There's no denying that.
Exactly.
But from like a human side of it, the bigger question is, where's the backup? Why isn't there like an army of cops over there? Why is 45 minutes going away? And like, this guy's the only guy in there.
There was other officers that showed up within 45 minutes, but
And why weren't they in there?
Oh, they were. He was just standing outside while they went in and did the thing.
I think, but I think 45 minutes had elapsed before anything happened in there, is from what I understood. I didn't watch every second of the trial. I could be wrong about it. Look, there's no question that the guy should have done something.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the analogy. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but it's a situation where it's a law enforcement officer. Yes, you would be putting your life potentially on the line for doing something. Even less on this one, had James Burke, did something or investigated, he's not necessarily putting his life on the line.
Right.
He's certainly, if he's involved, he's putting his reputation on the line if you go down there. So in some way, too, it's a reputation, it's your legacy, it's everything. If you do throw it out there and potentially they start finding stuff on you, it is throwing your life away in a certain extent.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see. But the other obviously big question is, and we've been asking this just since they arrested Heuermann, just on the Heuermann facts alone. But now that we have this other aspect to it of the James Burke, how many other cold cases are out there? How many other killers are out there is my question beyond Heuermann. I'm guessing he's involved in many more, but if all these things were being swept under the rug, there's had to have been far more than 4 sex worker murders in Long Island over the course of 12, 13 years. How many other obvious leads did they have for others that have just been sitting there as well?
I mean, who knows? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like we're talking about a big country with a lot of different law enforcement agencies. And, I mean, look, in Chicago, we've got these waterway, though they're not calling them killings, but these waterway deaths that are happening in the Chicago River, which are, I want to look into it. Chicago police and the city are saying, look, they're just accidents, people falling into the river. And, so then when I'm getting pushback, because I've put it out there, I've reached out to other podcasters that are investigating, various subject matter for their podcast. And I said, look, do we want to form like a coalition and go at these? Because it's happening in Austin and it's happening in Chicago and it's happening like there's 3 or 4 cities, Boston, where it seems like there's this trend. And it's, so in the pushback I get on those things are like, oh, these are the drowning numbers annually. And I'm like, here's the problem with Chicago is that people don't drown in the Chicago River. It's like, it's one of those things where it's a waterway. It's kind of a crown jewel in terms of the walkway throughout the city. It's architecturally beautiful.
Yeah.
And they understand that people are going to be down there. So in terms of liability, they go to great lengths to make sure that there's safety measures in place so that people aren't just falling into the river.
Yeah, exactly.
And these, and when you're comparing like people that are drowning, okay, you first have to pull out people that their entire goal for that day was to go into the water. Like they were going to the lake to swim, they were going to go kayaking, whatever activity they were going to do involved being in the water. These are people that were at concerts, that were coming from bars. And it's always, young men and they're, from 25 to 30 and they're all intoxicated and they're all alone. And all of these guys, and there's been 9 of them in the last 12 months that have been found in the river. And it's the same thing that's going down in Austin. And, so to me, it at least in Chicago, I mean, you have to understand cities that are seen as tourism hubs do not want people reading stories about serial killers in their cities because it scares people from traveling to those cities. It's always follow the money, Tony. You know that. Everything's follow the money at the end of the day. So, I it's hard to say, man, but I mean, there's various reasons, a lot of it political, a lot of it driven financially in terms of what they're willing to look at. That's where I give first, many warts is like the online sleuth community can give, maybe should have, in terms of like, look, maybe we should step back a little bit. The fact that we've been able to apply pressure, like in a way that's vocal so that law enforcement and government hears what we're saying. Like, I mean, you've seen the trend. It's been incredible in terms of, missing and indigenous women, in terms of, trying to get John and Jane Doe's identified.
Yep.
If we think things are going on that seem nefarious, investigate them. Cold cases that sat on the shelf and got no love for decades, or they're being forced to reopen them and dig into these things because people deserve justice. Those are the positive attributes to what's going on and online and in social media and with all these communities applying the pressure that was never there before. So I mean, I have hope, but we have to temper it. It's a slippery slope, because like people, you get people that think that they're Sherlock Holmes and they start accusing people without real evidence, it's problematic. So, there's a balance there. I mean, we want to be able to hold government and law enforcement, put their feet to the fire and say, okay, look, you need to be looking into this because, we've done enough research to know that something potentially is going on. At the very least, humor us and investigate it. You know what I'm saying? So, it's really an exciting new world. And it goes into play with the IGG stuff. I mean, it's all intertwined. It's like we live in such a different, we're getting closer and closer to the Minority Report. With the
we are.
We really are, man.
On your points there with social media, I echoed the exact same thing. I said in an interview yesterday for courthousenews.com, and they're asking about, what are the advantages of the online sleuths? What are the disadvantages? And there's good ones, there's bad ones. It's a matter of understanding where you're getting good information from and not. And the good ones have certainly been able to move the ball far further than in many of these cases than it's been even touched for years or decades in many cases.
100%, man. Like 100%. And look, my second season, I did my first season on Gacy because my dad was his lawyer. And that was really about the original arrest, the victims, and the trial. But, the second season, I'm going to be boots on the ground. I think that there's additional victims, and I think that we know where they may be buried. So we're going out because law enforcement, it's the same thing. Chicago did not want bodies. Like as far as Gacy was concerned, he was a suburb. That wasn't the city proper. So the city didn't have to put 33 victims on its murder sheet, because like no city wants that.
Sure.
Again, it all boils down to money. And it all boils down to appearances, and no city wants to be known as the murder capital of the world. It's not good for business. So, back in the 70s, like after they dug the bodies out of Gacy's crawl space, they did nothing. Like what we're seeing with Rex, that did not happen with Gacy. They did nothing. And this guy operated for 8 years, potentially longer. There was no investigation beyond what they found in the house and what they found in the river. That's it. There was nothing, and obviously now, back then they didn't have DNA. Now, obviously it's a different circumstance, but still it's there. There's enough that we can dig up. And so I'm working with an old Chicago cop who's been digging into this for 20 years. And we're going to see what we can find, man. So, I'm out there, boots on the ground, trying to do the same thing.
There's likely a whole other chapter to this story that you're going to dig up. I'm
hoping. If there's victims out there, they deserve their names back, and their families deserve some kind of closure. So, that's what the goal is.
This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast
with Tony Brueski.